Thanks, John. Our final speaker tonight is Jonah Goldberg, who's a very busy man, and we're very happy and fortunate that he could be here with us. Jonah doesn't need much introduction either. He's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He was instrumental in creating National Review Online and its must-read blog, The Corner. And I'm sure you know that Jonah is mostly known for his political writing, but he's been writing intelligently and creatively about culture for over a decade. And John mentioned his outstanding article on Groundhog Day, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it remains National Review's most requested reprint.
I don't know if that's true, but
okay.
It is on
let's just say that is true. Another thing about Jonah is that he approaches politics with real cultural savvy, as well as deep understanding of conservative thought. And I think it's fair to say that he's probably the only columnist working today who can weave together references to women's prison movies and Edmund Burke's philosophy in the same paragraph. So, welcome, Jonah.
Wow. If I knew you guys were going to give me a podium, I wouldn't have worn pants. First of all, this is all very thrilling for me because for years I've been told that my writing style and my approach to politics and conservatism was bringing down the standards of National Review, and it turns out that I was just ahead of my time. This is great. When I told my wife I was going to be speaking here, she's a professional speechwriter, and I asked her what she thought I should say. She said I should take a page from Barack Obama and just make it all about myself. Look, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I think that has come up, I already agree with. I think that that there's a lot of things that I don't want to repeat, but I'll just sort of start off from the beginning saying, this is one of these tough things to talk about because either you can talk about it seriously and bore people to death, or you can talk about it funnily and not really get at the same issue, the core of the issues. I kind of feel like the guy who wants to be a taxidermist and a veterinarian, and that way you can promise you'll get your dog back no matter what. I think it's sort of interesting that the title of this conference is Can Conservatives Reclaim the Culture? And no one here has made a real case that we actually ever claimed the culture. And I'm not sure that we ever did. I think that in some ways, certainly the conservatives of 50 years ago were complaining about how we were losing the popular culture. And the conservatives of 100 years ago were complaining about how we were losing the popular culture. And we all heard the stories about how when they debuted, what was it, Tchaikovsky, not Tchaikovsky, Rites of Spring, who wrote it? Tchaikovsky? Stravinsky. See how things are going to seed? The crowd rioted because it was so outrageous. Culture is a weird thing to sort of look back through the telescope, through the wrong end of the telescope at the past and think that we know exactly how these things were played out at the time. And it seems to me that we also have a sort of a definitional problem, sort of what is culture, right? It's sort of like when people talk about the media. I do a lot of thumb-sucking panels about the media and liberal media bias and all that, and I've helped pay my mortgage by talking about liberal media bias, and since it's never going away, I can continue to do it for a long time. But it's funny, I have a friend who was invited to be the articles editor at Playboy. This was years ago. Or as they call him at Playboy, the words guy. And which if you look on the masthead is like 9 places down. I mean, it's like in most magazines, the words guy runs the thing, but at Playboy, he's just one step above the kid who gets coffee. And he went home to his wife and he said, "Hey, look, I got this job offer to be an editor at Playboy. And it's just another magazine. It's just another job in the media." And his wife was like, "No, it's not just another job in the media." Because there's a huge amount of diversity in what we think of as the media. And there's a huge amount of diversity about what we think about is the culture. Some of what we were talking about when we were in some of the earlier discussion was about culture, and some of it was about society, and some of it was about the interaction between the two. There's some of it about art, right? I mean, the arts, is the arts the culture or not? One of the things I think that is radical, one of the things I'm really interested in these days is how technology changes culture. And I think this is one of the big problems that conservatives have. Conservatives love ideas, right? We're all really, we wear our favorite intellectuals on our ties, we're dorks. we get into these arguments like we're Dungeons and Dragons geeks about like, I'm a level 9 Hayekian and that kind of thing. And part of that is what I love about conservatism is that we love to argue about ideas. And the problem with arguing about ideas is that not all change comes from ideas. The car did vastly more to destabilize intact communities than any idea that escaped some, East German lab and poisoned the minds of our youth ever could. But you can have an argument with Nietzsche, you can have an argument with Derrida and Foucault and all these people. You can't have an argument with the Buick. It just won't argue back. And so we tend to, sort of like the drunk who's looking for his car keys where the light is good, we tend to want to have arguments about ideas without paying attention to the culture. And one of the things that's just profoundly changing the culture, in good ways and bad, in good ways I make a living off of it, in bad it's making a lot of young people really stupid, is the internet. And you can see it, if you deal with kids, there is this unbelievable amnesia that hits when kids start growing up on the internet. Because they just don't read the same way. We're raising kids now, particularly little kids, in a tablet culture where they are even more hostile to books than they ever were. There are other things that are happening to the culture. In the 19th century, or even in the 1950s, if you were a really twisted pervert, you were kind of on your own, right? I mean, it was really kind of difficult to go out on a date and be like, I would really like to put on a big Marmaduke costume and pee on you, right? Now you can take out an ad for that on Craigslist. And this whole idea of alienation and isolation that allowed a majority culture to impose something like a cultural norm is gone. Because people can simply create communities out of any twisted, weird perversion you can imagine. I was on Red Eye the other night, the show on Fox, and I was sitting there in the green room talking to this lawyer who had a client who did unspeakable things with children's pajamas at department stores. That was just his thing. And he was like, but I'm not a pedophile. I'm not into kids. I just like the way the softy jammies feel. And I do things that should be illegal and put me in jail, but I do them in public with these jammies. And he's got friends who are like him because you can search the internet and find people like you. So much of the ways in which societies for millennia policed social norms have gone out the window because now everybody has got a posse to reinforce their own attitudes and weirdnesses. And look, there are a lot of plus signs to the internet, but like everything else, there's good and bad. I think it's kind of interesting how this whole conversation basically comes out of the 2012 elections, which in Arabic I would refer to as the Nakba, which means the catastrophe, and it's what the Palestinians refer to the founding of Israel, but I think in American politics it works just fine. And everyone has been, especially on our side of things, everyone's been talking about why Romney lost. And I don't think that's a particularly interesting question anymore. It's certainly been done to death. The more interesting question is why Obama won. We know why Romney's pitch didn't work too well. I've been saying this for a very long time now. Romney's problem is he has an authentic inauthenticity problem. He seems fake, but that's really the way he is, right? It's like when have you ever seen an alligator? The first time you see an alligator, you look at it and you're like, dude, there's no way that thing's real. And then you lean in kind of close and it goes, and you're, whoa, holy shit, and you freak out and you're like, it just turns out that alligators look fake. And Mitt Romney looks fake. He looks like the picture that came with the frame. And in today's, and there are all sorts of other reasons why he lost. There's all sorts of antipathy towards ideas and providing a clear alternative, and they ran a campaign on the assumption that they were 3 points ahead instead of 5 points behind. There are all sorts of other things like that. But at the end of the day, one of the things that really hurt him was his inability to connect with people. And I think in our culture today, that kind of authenticity thing is hugely important for connecting with people. But there's another problem. It's why Barack Obama won. And I don't have time to get into all the weeds about it, but I think one of the things that is happening in our culture, or our society, you can come up with whatever term you want for it, but in the part of America that isn't the government, we are seeing an erosion and breakdown in civil society, in the family, and in basically most of the power and authority of intermediating institutions in our society in a way that is really unprecedented. Marriage, I mean, I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but out of wedlock birth is just skyrocketing for whites, for blacks, for Hispanics, for everybody. Marriage for everybody except the top quintile, everybody except the well-to-do who are getting married. They just refuse to preach what they practice. But for the bottom 80%, marriage is falling apart at the seams. And I'm actually a very pro-immigration guy. I like immigration. I like legal immigration, but I like lots of it. But regardless, the data is now pretty much in. Robert Putnam at Harvard had this fascinating study of over 3,000 people he surveyed in this huge longitudinal study across the United States. And his conclusion is that immigration is deeply and dangerously corrosive to civil society. It's not because of racism. It's because when you have a community that all of a sudden becomes so much more heterogeneous, so much more complex, so much filled with others and on all the rest, people tend to hunker down, tend to retreat, tend to fall back into what de Tocqueville called the solitude of our hearts. And it doesn't make them bad people, it's just one of these natural or sad consequences, and Putnam really hopes that in the long term, as do I, this will all fix itself. But in the immediate term, the public space where people interact is just getting smaller and less healthy. And one of the main reasons why is because of the decline of marriage. There was a great piece in the Washington Post a few months ago by a black columnist who was trying to figure out why African Americans don't play baseball anymore. The number of native-born African Americans playing baseball in the United States is at its lowest point basically since 1975, which was the high water mark or something like that. And it's continuing to drop. And one of the answers he found from talking to Little League coaches and all these different sort of experts in the field was that baseball is a game that is taught by fathers. You've got to learn, baseball, you've got to learn, first of all, these crazy numbers by having someone explain them to you sitting next to you on the couch or in the stadium, right? And you start playing baseball by playing catch with your dad. Football and basketball are these games that you play with peers, that you go down to the playground, you go out in the street, and you can pick it up anytime, all you need is the ball. Baseball is a different kind of thing. And in the large swaths of America, the African American community, marriage is extremely rare and not in great shape. They're ahead of where whites are, but whites are catching up as fast as they can. And as Charles Murray, my colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, likes to say, there aren't a lot of single men coaching soccer clubs. Because as anybody who's married in this room knows, our wives make us do these kinds of things. And even if you're the hardest working, best single mom in the world, just the amount of time you have in the day to be able to do these things in civil society decreases rapidly. And that's a big part of the culture. And I think that one of the things that was working for Obama is that he appealed to these people, the honest, decent, rational American people who yearn to have that sense of belonging that people used to get from local communities or from their family or from their churches. The pews are all empty these days, except in the seriously evangelical side of things. And Robert Nisbet wrote a fantastic book called The Quest for Community, and in it he argues that we have an innate instinctual drive to belong to a community. And if you don't belong to a community, if you don't have access to that, if you don't have access to that feeling of having that hole filled in your soul, the hole of your soul filled by family or by a community or by church or whatever, it doesn't mean that hunger goes away. If you can't have a steak and you're starving, it doesn't mean that you're not going to eat. It means you're going to eat whatever you can eat. And so that's what makes the pitch from people like Barack Obama so seductive, is because he is appealing to people. When I heard at the Democratic Convention that at the opening video said, government is the one thing we all belong to, it creeped me out, right? I'm kind of a Tea Party guy. When I hear stuff like that, it makes me want to flip the safety on my rifle. But, because to me, what I hear is the complete inversion of the entire concept of the American family, founding, which is that the citizens own the government doesn't own the citizens, right? Societies where the government owns the citizens are monarchies and totalitarian regimes where people are subjects and not citizens. But the problem is that that's not who they were aiming. They weren't. I think everyone in this room can agree the Obama campaign was not targeting me. They were targeting people who were, they were targeting Julia. They were targeting people who were open to this pitch, and it worked. And one of the things that I think conservatives have to do, outside of the arts, outside of Hollywood, outside of all that stuff, is figure out a way to fix the the civil society institutions out there where the real progress is done. Because I think everybody here agrees, if you're married and have kids, there's nothing more conservatizing than having kids, because kids are these horrible little barbarians. They're adorable, but the only way you make them non-barbarians is by trying to raise them right. And all of a sudden, all of these shows and all of this culture that you used to sort of imbibe like it was from a fire hose, you're all of a sudden saying, oh my, you all start seeing it through your kids' eyes, and you're disgusted. I don't quick turn away the channel when my wife comes downstairs, but I do when my daughter comes downstairs, because I'm afraid she's going to see some of the things I'm watching. Like Meet the Press. Okay, so very quickly, so what to do about it? The short answer is, I have no idea, but no one else really does, and it didn't stop them. And besides, I'm a pundit, so it's my job to do this kind of make stuff up on the fly. No, and when I say they didn't propose, my colleagues on the panel didn't propose anything. I don't mean it like that. I just mean culture is so complex. There are no silver bullets. There are no single solutions. It's a bunch of different remedies. But here are some of the ideas I have. One of the things I liked in Larry's opening talk was where he was talking about Jonathan Haidt's thing about talking to the elephant. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And that was one of the things I planned on talking about from the beginning when I got here, was, when John was talking about celebrating what's conservative in the existing culture. I think conservatives are really, really bad at this. And I didn't know that John and I were at the forefront of a trend until I heard his talk, but I'm glad to hear it. I also think that, I know this is not shocking, that Joe Biden is too stupid to be a spell checker at an M&M factory. And I think he's absolutely wrong about Will and Grace. I promise you that in 50 years, people are going to go look back on Will and Grace and see it as the gay equivalent of Step and Fetch It. The characters on that thing are such unbelievable parodies of gay dudes. Maybe not Will, but his buddy who is Jack, yeah, who, will be seen as one of the most grotesque stereotypes. The show that is actually hugely important is actually Modern Family. And one of the things about Modern Family that is so interesting is, look, if you go back and you look at the history, the left hated marriage, hated it, wanted to smash monogamy. Andrew Sullivan, before he went crazy, used to make these wonderful case for gay marriage, and the queer left, which used to be the only gay left that existed, beat him up regularly for it, because they hated the idea of marriage. It was a bourgeois institution. And now, what has happened in this culture is that everyone thinks that the only way to respect gay people is to trap them in the very bourgeois institution that the gay left for years said was absolutely terrible. It's a fascinating sort of change. Wherever you come down on gay marriage, the simple fact is you watch the gay couple on Modern Family, and they are, they're not out going to raves and wearing, Al Pacino cruising vests and acting like the Village people. They're like, they got to get home by 9 and get into bed because they're so tired from raising a kid. That's a very different cultural message. And the show's creators like to call the show subversive, and I think they're right, but I don't think they realize who they're subverting. One of my biggest peeves about abortion is you watch, I remember this when it started with the show Friends. That was the first time I ever noticed it, but it happens all the time, where all the shows have to pay this lip service to a woman's right to choose. They always have to say, I don't know what I'm going to do, am I going to keep it, am I not going to keep it, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually they always decide to keep it, because if they weren't going to keep it, they wouldn't be having an episode where a character gets pregnant in the first place, right? And the second she decides, Rachel decides to keep her baby, it immediately stops being a fetus and starts being a baby. And everyone's got to talk to her belly, and she's got to care about what she eats, and all this kind of stuff. And it is a profoundly pro-life message. The second she decides she's going to have a baby, it's no longer uterine contents or anything like that. It's no longer a choice. It's a baby. And And one of the reasons why I don't think the left complains about this stuff, because the right never points it out. And often, the only time you can get the left to engage in some of these arguments is if you call them on it. You know, there are shows like Breaking Bad, which is one of my absolute favorite shows, which is a deeply, deeply conservative, in a biblical sense, show. Because basically what it is talking about is the utter and complete seductiveness of evil, and how a few well-intentioned mistakes early on can snowball into such a terrible thing. I remember writing a thing about how, oh gosh, what was it? Now I can't even remember what the name of the movie was, so we'll come back to it. But the show is one of these things that sort of shows you how when you deviate from sort of traditional morality, even for good intentions, you can often end up someplace that you never wanted to be. And it shows you how once you end up on that path, it's so corrupting to your own soul.
A Simple Plan?
A Simple Plan, there you go. A Simple Plan I wrote was the most conservative movie of the 1990s, the Sam Raimi movie, where this good guy makes one sort of little selfish mistake by deciding to keep some money that some drug he found that belonged to drug dealers, and it destroys his entire life. I didn't mean to give you that kind of spoiler, but you know, John started it with the Bogart spoiler. I was about to yell spoiler alert at him when he was talking. And then, you know, I wrote this whole book about the tyranny cliches. We're not going to get into all that, but you know, this is one of the ways where I think, you know, Sam's a little wrong about the role of public schools. I mean, I'm against public schools, get rid of them and all that, but you know, there's probably no message that kids have been beaten over the head with, ironically enough, more than violence doesn't solve anything. And it is, you know, no hitting. Kids are being sent home from school because they have Pop-Tarts that look like guns, right? I mean, this is like onion stuff. And yet, after the entire baby boomer hippie revolution and all this other stuff, and you know, movies have only gotten more violent, and guns have only been cast more as a solution to all of your problems. And you know, it would be nice if every now and then in a whatever, like Die Hard 17 or whatever they're up to, you know, every time some guy shoots one of the bad guys or something, if someone just yelled out in the audience, "Thank you, Second Amendment," you know, because these movies are unbelievable love letters to the important role that violence can play in solving certain kinds of problems, violent problems. And here I want to agree with Brad a lot about something. You know, my friend Andrew Breitbart died a little over a year ago, and Andrew and I were co-conspirators on the early days of the internet, back when it was running with pneumatic tubes. And one of the things that we thought was incredibly important was mockery. I mean, just plain old mockery. And it has to be intelligent, and it has to be funny. It can't, you know, one of the things I try to explain to campus conservative groups all the time is being rude for its own sake is just a long way of saying you're being an ass. It doesn't mean you can never be rude, but rudeness just for the sake of rudeness is called asininity. And it has to have a point to it. It can't just be get in the face of people kind of thing. And there are a lot of kids who want to rebel against political correctness, probably not here at Hillsdale, who don't seem to understand that just having bad manners may be politically incorrect, but it doesn't win over anybody either. And politics has to be about persuasion, or it's pointless, right? Otherwise, it's just like a Civil War reenactment club. But I'll give you an example about how it's working. Do you remember when word got out, because everyone was making fun of Mitt Romney for putting his dog on his car and all that, and all these other terrible sort of stupid things, little things. And then I think it was Jim Treacher from the Daily Caller noticed that in Barack Obama's memoir, or one of them, I can't count how many he's written by now, that Barack Obama admitted to eating dog. And for like a week, a bunch of us on Twitter just ran wild with this. I mean, it didn't matter what was coming out in the news. I mean, it really, you know, like, closeted gay setter found in bathroom with a harem of cabana boys. Who cares? Obama ate a dog. You know, conservatives cave on immigration reform. Obama ate a dog. You know, it just didn't matter because Obama ate a dog. And the one thing we knew about Americans is that they don't believe you should eat dogs. And it wasn't actually that any of us actually cared that he ate the dog. I mean, I'm against it, but it was that we were basically parroting the way the left argues about all these things. Some find some stupid thing about a conservative and just beat it up all day long and don't tolerate anything else. And we had a field day with it. And then the White House Correspondents' Dinner came, and Barack Obama, even though not a single mainstream news outlet, not the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, NBC, CBS, CNN, none of them touched this story at all. Barack Obama recognized, or David Axelrod or whoever, recognized that he had to address it. And he made like 5 dog-eating jokes. And so basically a bunch of just immature idiots on Twitter, of which I am proudly one of, goaded the President of the United States into having to address the inconvenient fact that he ate a dog. I also agree a lot with Brad about the vitally important thing of saying "I told you so," and I actually think saying "I told you so" is a reward in and of itself, right? One of the things we learned from Margaret Thatcher's legacy is that she stood by her principles and her convictions, and she said "I told you so" a lot. She also said it doesn't have to be like this, which is also hugely important. Conservatives need to provide an alternative in the culture. They can't just be mocking. We have to have something of our own as well. And I'm sort of reminded about like when Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York City, was voted out of lost his attempt to win a 3rd term in office. He was asked if he was ever going to run again, and he said, "No, the people of New York have fired me, and now they must be punished." It is hugely important in the culture to point out to people that the bad things that are happening in their lives are often a consequence of the bad decisions that they made, whether it's at the national level by electing Barack Obama President of the United States, or whether it's at the local level by, I don't know, speedballing heroin. You know, there is nothing wrong with saying serves you right from time to time. And we've lost that in this culture, is that everybody who makes a mistake and everybody who has a problem, it's somehow not their fault. But sometimes, it is your fault. And people should be told that it's their fault. Not so much because we're going to win over the people that we're telling it's their fault, but we might win over the other people who are listening. And the last thing I would just sort of say, because I know I'm running long, is be happy. Right? There's nothing that pisses off the left more than a happy conservative. It violates all of the things that they believe in, right? I mean, there's this ancient joke, I'm sure you've heard, it's been around for 20 years. How many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's not funny. Conservatives are the people who are on the side of enjoying life. Conservatives are the people who are on the side of actually understanding that most of the important things in life are outside the realm of politics. This is one of the reasons I love popular culture. It's not so much because I'm a conservative, it's because I love popular culture. And I watch this stuff, and it's amazing to me that The Simpsons has been on longer than a lot of you have been alive. Be a happy warrior. Enjoy life. It doesn't mean you have to spend your entire time in politics. In fact, I don't recommend that if you don't want to do that. Because most of the real if you don't like it, why do it? And I mean that in a professional career sense. The idea of spending the rest of your life at a job that you truly loathe makes no sense to me. But at the same time, the real joys in life don't come out of politics. They come out of the things you do in terms of the people you meet, the friends you have, the experiences you have. But at the same time, you should have a certain sort of willingness to be confident and say, look, this is where I'm coming from. I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We were sort of like Christians in ancient Rome as conservatives. I've never lived anywhere where I wasn't outnumbered 7 or 8 to 1 in terms of my vote. And I'm not sure I'd want it any other way, because I enjoy having the fight. But you should figure out where the fights that you want to have. And ultimately, the only way we're ever going to win this thing is if you have them on your terrain, because it's a door-to-door fight. It is not some big battle of the bulge between the forces of goodness and light and the forces of Nancy Pelosi. It's one of these things that it's a battle that's going to be waged in your own heart and in your own families and your own communities and your own schools and your own families. And And if you can enjoy yourself and laugh at yourself a little bit, it'll take people by surprise. One of the reasons why I did National Review Online the way I did it in the beginning, with all the women's prison movie references and all the rest, was that conservatism had this reputation, especially William F. Buckley's National Review style conservatism, of being all, Latin puns and Chesterton quotes. And I kind of wanted to point out that that conservatives are actually people too, and that we don't need a truckload of brand just to crack a smile. And I think that's a really important message to take forward, because the place where the liberals win the most, where the left wins the most, is at the level of claiming that to be a truly realized and happy and joyous person, you have to be on the left. And the amazing reality is how unbelievably untrue that is. Thank you all very much.